4,000 years ago, while Egypt was still building pyramids, northern Italy already had planned cities with straight streets, running water, and walls taller than an elephant. Then one day every citizen walked away and never came back. Tonight we reveal why. Long before Rome was even a dream, long before the Etruscans painted their tombs with scenes of banquets and sea monsters, and centuries before the first Greek colonist set foot on Italian soil, a forgotten civilization already ruled the peninsula. They forged bronze swords that could sever a man's arm with a single stroke, built cities on stilts above shining lakes, laid out entire urban landscapes on perfect grids, raised stone towers that still defy gravity on a lonely island in the Tyrrhenian Sea, and buried their dead beneath mountains of golden amber brought from the cold beaches of the Baltic. They traded with distant peoples whose names have vanished, crossed the highest alpine passes with ox, carts loaded with tin and amber, and then, almost overnight, they disappeared, leaving behind only blackened earth, silent stone, and a mystery that has haunted archaeologists for more than a century. This is the story of Bronze Age Italy. It begins with a grave. In the spring of 1896, farmers ploughing a field near the village of Rimadello in Lombardy struck something hard. They dug and uncovered a skeleton lying on its side, knees drawn up, accompanied by a copper dagger, a flat copper axe, and flint arrows so finely napped they looked like glass. When scientists finally dated the bones, they were stunned. This warrior had died around 2800 BC. He was one of the first men in Western Europe buried with metal weapons. The age of metal had reached Italy. Copper by itself is soft, almost like gold. It bends too easily to make a reliable sword. The true revolution came 2 centuries later when an unknown genius discovered that adding roughly 1 part tin to 9 parts copper produced an alloy that rang like a bell when struck and held an edge sharp enough to shave with. Bronze was born, and northern Italy became one of the first places on Earth to master it on an industrial scale. By 2200 BC, the shores of Lake Garda, the marshes of the Veneto, and the plains around Verona were dotted with villages built entirely on wooden platforms raised above the water on thousands of sharpened piles. We call them pile, wellings or palafit. When lake levels drop today, the tops of those ancient posts still emerge like the ribs of drowned monsters. More than 30 such villages have been found in the last 20 years alone, perfectly preserved under layers of mud and peat. Archaeologists diving in the cold waters of Lake Ledro have brought up wooden bowls still containing the carbonized remains of 4,000-year-old bread, nets woven from lime, tree bark, and even a complete boat carved from a single oak trunk 20 meters long. These were the people of the Pallada culture. They lived half in the water and half on it, fishing for pike and carp, hunting red deer in the surrounding forests, and slowly perfecting the art of bronze. Thousands of clay molds for axes, daggers, and the first true swords have been found along those forgotten shores. This was Europe's earliest bronze industry, and it was already exporting weapons as far away as Switzerland and southern Germany. But the lakes were only the beginning. Around 1700 BC, something dramatic happened in the central Po Valley. A new way of life appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, or perhaps evolved so quickly from the lake villages that we cannot see the transition. We call it the Terramare culture after the rich black earth their abandoned settlements left behind. These were no longer scattered hamlets. They were proper cities, planned from the start with straight streets, right-angle intersections, and massive defensive works. Some covered 20 or 30 hectares, larger than many cities of the classical Greek world centuries later. Each teramere was surrounded by an earthen rampart up to 10 meters high and a moat fed by diverted rivers. Inside, identical rectangular houses stood in neat rows, raised on wooden posts to keep them dry during the winter floods. Water came from deep wells lined with stacked wooden barrels, a technological marvel for the time. Waste was collected in designated pits, showing a concern for hygiene that would not be matched again in Europe until the Romans. At its peak around 1400 BC, more than 60,000 people lived in the teramere network, a population density unmatched north of the Alps until the Industrial Revolution. They needed bronze in enormous quantities. A single cemetery could yield hundreds of swords, spears, and helmets. Where did all that metal come from? The copper was local, mined in the Alps of Trentino and South Tyrol. Deep underground, miners followed veins of pure copper using nothing but deer, antler picks, and fire to crack the rock. One mine near Brescinon still has the blackened fingerprints of those ancient workers preserved in soot on the tunnel walls. But tin was the problem. The nearest large deposits lay in Cornwall or the Erzgebirge Mountains between Saxony and Bohemia, 1,500 kilometers away over some of the highest mountains in Europe. Yet the trade happened. We know because the graves of the teramere elite glitter with Baltic amber. Amber does not occur naturally south of Denmark. It had to travel the entire length of Europe along what archaeologists call the Amber Road, crossing the Alps at the Brenner Pass and descending into the Po Valley, where it was carved into beads, animal figures, and elaborate necklace spacers. One man buried near Palma wore a cloak covered with hundreds of tiny amber discs sewn on like sequins and a necklace of nearly 200 beads. Beside him lay a bronze sun, disc the size of a dinner plate. He was clearly a king or a high priest, and his wealth came from controlling the flow of exotic goods across half a continent. For 250 years, the teramere civilization flourished. Its cities grew richer, its warriors better armed, its potters and bronze smiths more skilled. Then, between 1200 and 1150 BC, catastrophe struck. Every single teramere was abandoned. The great ramparts were left to crumble, the wells deliberately filled with broken pottery and animal bones, the houses burned or simply walked away from. Tens of thousands of people vanished from the Po Valley almost overnight. Pollen samples taken from lake beds tell part of the story. Around 1200 BC, a sudden, century-long drought began, part of a wider climate shift that affected the entire eastern Mediterranean. Rivers dried, crops failed, the carefully engineered landscape turned hostile. But there is another clue. In the final layers of many teramere sites, archaeologists find crude, hand-made pottery decorated with incised lines, pottery that has no local ancestor. It comes from across the Adriatic, from the Balkans. New people were already moving into the vacuum. While the teramere cities collapsed, a very different world thrived in the mountain chain that runs like a backbone down the center of the Italian peninsula. We call it the Apennine culture. Its people lived in small defended villages on hilltops or inside spectacular caves. They herded sheep and goats across high summer pastures, made dark burnished pottery decorated with swirling meandroid patterns, and invented the safety pin, the arched fibula that would spread across Europe and change clothing forever. Deep inside caves in Tuscany and Liguria, they left thousands of tiny bronze figurines, human shapes with raised arms, horned helmets, enormous hands, sometimes exaggerated breasts or erect phalli. The figures were deliberately broken and thrown into crevices as offerings. To whom, a mother goddess, a sky god, the rituals continued long after the terramare disappeared, suggesting spiritual traditions that would later feed into it, Ruscan and eventually Roman religion. Far to the west, across the Tyrrhenian Sea, an island was building monuments that still stun visitors today. From around 1800 BC, the people of Sardinia began raising stone towers called Nuraghe. More than 10,000 were built, some reaching 20 meters in height, made of basalt blocks weighing many tons each, perfectly fitted without mortar. The largest complexes, like Su Nuraxi at Barumini or Santu Antoni, contained multiple towers linked by walls and surrounded by villages of round stone houses. This was megalithic architecture on a scale rivaled only by Mycenaean Greece or Egypt at the same moment in history. Nuragic bronze statuettes show warriors with horned helmets, archers drawing powerful composite bows, boxers, and chieftains carrying staffs of command. Their ships, known from clay models, had high prows decorated with deer antlers. Recent DNA studies reveal that these island warriors traded regularly with the mainland. Sardinian type axes appear in terramare hordes, and northern Italian amber reaches Sardinia in quantity. The sea was a highway, not a barrier. The centuries after 1150 BC are known as the final Bronze Age in Italy. Population fell sharply, villages shrank, but bronze craftsmanship reached its artistic peak. This is the time of the great hoards. Hundreds of kilograms of swords, axes, and ornaments deliberately bent, broken, and buried in rivers and bogs. Some see these as offerings to appease gods angered by drought and famine. Others see the wreckage of a collapsed economy where metal had become more valuable buried than circulating. New influences arrived. From the Balkans came the first iron knives, still rare and inferior to bronze blades, but a sign of things to come. From the eastern Mediterranean came rumors of shattered empires and migrating peoples. Egyptian records speak of sea raiders called the Sherdun wearing horned helmets, who attacked the Nile Delta alongside other sea peoples. Many scholars now believe the Sherdun may have come from Sardinia. The resemblance between Nuragic warrior figurines and Egyptian reliefs is striking. By 900 BC, the Bronze Age was ending. Iron was becoming cheaper and more common. New peoples, the Villanovans who would become the Etruscans, were already burying their dead in tomb chambers that foreshadowed the great Etruscan necropolises. In the south, Greek colonists were about to arrive and write the first pages of recorded Italian history. Yet everything that made later Italy distinctive was already present in the Bronze Age. The passion for urban life with straight streets and public spaces, the obsession with engineering water through canals and wells, the genius for bronze sculpture that looked almost alive, the trade networks that stretched from the Baltic to the Aegean, even the religious symbolism of horned gods and divine mothers, all of it has roots deeper than Rome, deeper than the Etruscans, deeper than we ever imagined. They left no writing, no names, no portraits of their kings, But they left cities whose grid plans can still be traced under modern fields, stone towers that have outlasted empires, and bronze swords that ring like bells when a farmer's plough strikes them after 4,000 years. Every spring in Emilia-Romagna or Veneto, when the soil is turned, another piece of that lost world comes to light. A dagger here, an amber bead there, sometimes an entire village preserved under peat. The earth of Italy is still speaking, and archaeologists are only now learning to listen. The Bronze Age Italians did not simply disappear. They became the foundation on which everything that followed was built. Rome was not the beginning. 4,000 years ago, they walked away from their cities and never looked back. The fires died in the hearths of the Terramare. The lakes rose and swallowed the pile. Dwellings. The Nuraghe, he stood alone under the Sardinian sun, silent giants guarding an empty island. They left no names. No kings carved their victories on stone. No priests wrote down their prayers. They simply vanished. And in doing so, became the deepest foundation of everything that would later call itself Italian. Because every time a plowshare in Emilia rings against a bronze sword, every time an amber bead rolls out of the dark earth in Veneto, every time a child on Sardinia climbs a Nuraghe and feels the wind that has blown there since the world was young, they are still speaking. Rome did not begin Italy. Rome only inherited it. Beneath the marble and the cathedrals, beneath the vineyards and the motorways, beneath 3,000 years of later glory, the first Italians are still here. They built the first cities. They lit the first bronze. They carried the first amber across the Alps under starlight we can no longer see. And when the world fell silent after their catastrophe, they did not end. It only waited. The story of Italy did not start with the she-wolf and the twins. It started here, in the black earth, in the cold lakes, in the ringing of bronze against bronze. And it is not over, because every spring the soil still remembers, and every spring it gives them back to us. One sword, one bead, one forgotten god at a time. This was never a lost civilization. It was the first, and we are still living in its shadow. Final line, delivered in absolute silence, except for distant wind. The secret was never buried. It was only sleeping. Music swells. Screen fades to black. Secrets of Bronze Age Italy. The foundation has been found.